Well, doing a sequel is always a tricky matter of trying to recreate what people liked about it and yet make it new and fresh. And in this case, double the size budget and 4 times the size of the physical production.
Instead of critters themselves being balls, it became they were able to link, and you can make that monster ball and everything, you know. So it was a bigger movie.
I don't know that anybody knew there was going to be a sequel. They just got the first one out there, and then the reaction was what it was.
Obviously, at the end of Critters 1, you see the eggs at the end of the movie, but I guess it did really well. So at that point, New Line was definitely seeing franchises, you know, based on the success of Nightmare on Elm Street.
It was let's say, a minor success theatrically, but Media Home Entertainment, who had money in the movie, immediately began making money. So I think it was, this is my memory, they sort of drove the train to making a Critters 2. They wanted a Critters 2. And of course, New Line was not gonna let it go. So we got asked to do Critters 2.
What takes you to Grover's Bend, son?
My grandmother lives there.
You know what the Bend's famous for, don't you? Hadn't your granny ever told you about those space porcupine things?
No, she never did.
It was much more of a studio picture, studio being New Line, than Rupert's of My Picture, which the first one was.
I remember Bob Shea, who was New Line Studio at the time. He was around a lot. He came around.
Because you were submitting to studio people, the script had to be tighter.
They'd already had a screenplay that they didn't think was quite there. You know, David Toohey, who became a very successful filmmaker in his own right as a director and as a writer, he had written a script.
We read David's scripts and said, okay, we'd like David to take a crack at this.
And he had taken it to a certain point. They wanted some more changes. And he said, according to Bob Shea, who I interviewed on my podcast, he said, well, David said, I'm done. It's not going to get any better than this.
Now, what in the hell am I going to do with you?
Mick came to us out of various agencies. New Line set us up with a bunch of people, and we met Mick and we picked Mick.
At the time, I was starting to do really well as a screenwriter. So I was getting paid really nicely and getting lots of jobs. Nothing had been produced yet, and then finally things started to happen. You know, Amazing Stories was getting produced, and I had been shown other projects, not officially offered a greenlit movie, but they sent me Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Ed Naha's script for that, and I would get various other things to look at. And I was afraid of my first directing job to not get something really heavy with visual effects and stunts and things like that, because I had so little experience in that. When suddenly New Line Pictures called me up, and this was the first actual green light offer movie as a director to say, we're making this, we want you to do it, do you want to do it? So I ended up doing a $4 million movie that was filled with special effects, kids, animals, all of this stuff. But I could not be happier that I did it.
He's my boy.
Mick's great. He's very giving as a director. He's one of these people that just kind of like throws out a general idea and then he asks everybody to kind of, you know, step up and make it work.
I just remember he was kind of laid back.
He's very kind and he works with actors and he is very technically efficient as well. So I think, you know, as far as directing, he's on the ball big time and was from the get.
As a director, he did a fabulous job, I think, coming into a situation that was already existed and to add his elements of creativity to it.
Oh, I'm sorry, honey. Boy, your Easter candy's a real mess.
Yeah.
I did have a script to work with, but they also told me, you know, we would love you to bring whatever you want into it. And it got a bit more broad. I mean, it was always a sequel to a low-budget ripoff of Gremlins, but I think there was a little of that Warner Brothers sense of humor brought to it.
I thought it was really, 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 really good as long as everybody played it like kind of super serious to sort of send the whole thing up.
But I didn't feel constrained by it because I was not involved in the first one, and yet there was a really good groundwork that David Toohey had written. So I was able to dive off that board and not go too far afield, but made it bigger and more funny. My lack of experience and working with actors and the like was such that I needed to rely on people I knew could do more than just what was in the script, and were able to bounce off of each other.
How long are you in town? Just through Easter vacation? Where do you guys live now? Up in Kansas City. KCK or KC-Mo?
Scott was great. He was a hoot. He was a fun kid. He was probably like, I think 15 or 16 when he did the second one.
I just remember that Scott was much older and bigger.
There was a lot of character growth for Scott's character. He's more than just an adolescent in Critters 2, and you can really see it. His voice is changing, but it would squeak at times.
Scott Grimes was awesome. Scott was very young at the time, like I was too. But so we were just kind of two bumbly teenagers, kind of, sort of, which worked really well with the storyline because, you know, it's that unsaid, yeah, you're kind of hot, but like I don't want to say anything, and you're kind of cute, but I would never admit to that because I'm a newspaper girl, sorry. You know, serious journalists don't have crushes on ginger boys. Doesn't happen. I'm sorry, was that rude? I'm sorry, Scott.
Does your dad still run the newspaper? I'm a reporter there. Really? Kind of like a Jimmy Olsen with breasts.
Because of the red hair and freckles and everything, he feels like the outsider to begin with. So he's the guy that the school bullies, Wesley, would kick the shit out of regularly. But he also has a great intelligence, a very smart guy, and very mature for his age as well. But he understood it, and we never really had any arguments about where the character was going. There was a lot of growth there, not just in the actor, but in the character he was playing. It became a more heroic leading man part, despite the fact that he's like 18 or 19 years old.
Get inside and lock the door.
We had a lot of fun singing harmonies to John Farnham songs. I know, that's really random, but we're both musicians, actually. So we had a lot of fun doing other stuff while we were getting our makeup on, which was very musical, always.
He always was in the makeup shops, either the Kyoto's or mine, and he was always like, oh, what are you doing now? What's that? You know, he was very excited about the stuff.
Charlie.
Brad.
Well, the character of Charlie is interesting. He comes from the first movie also.
As soon as they said, oh, we're going to do another one, I'm pretty sure I knew I was going to be in it. And I was cheap, you know what I'm saying? I wasn't, you know, big money.
Charlie became a favorite.
I'm just beginning to sort of get my head around that. There is something about the character, and I didn't realize that. It's just sort of dawning on me that that character, for some reason, appealed to young kids that saw it.
I loved having this kind of town drunk become somebody who's very likable. You know, Don himself is very quiet and a little bit standoffish, and then once the camera is rolling, he's a goofball and really reveling in it, but also ready to get to the place where, you know, I've got to go where no man has gone before.
Well, it's really good to have you back, Charlie.
And just bring some really sweetness into what could easily be just a one-note kind of former town drunk character.
How come you look like that rock and roll guy and Lee's still a nothing face?
Because this body fit, Lee stays a nothing face till he finds the right cell. Can't live in the wrong cell.
I just remember I got the call they want to do Critters 2. I went, great.
He had been in the first Critters and played the rock star character. Well, he was also a Broadway star, singer, actor. He was in Les Miserables. He was a huge success on Broadway. And he could easily have seen this little monster horror comedy as slumming, but he didn't. He played the shit out of it, and he was really great.
More Christ.
Yeah, a lot more. Boy, am I glad to see you.
There was never any discussion about bringing back Billy Greenbush or Dee Wallace.
I'm fairly sure she did not want to do another one. I believe we went back to her to have Brad's mom around.
As far as I can remember, there was no discussion about bringing me back for the sequel.
I mean, it would have been great. I would love to have worked with them, and Dee has become a friend over the years. But no, nobody ever brought up the idea. They weren't in the script that I was given to start with.
What in the hell are you doing here?
Well, of course, we tried to get Emmett Walsh back. He didn't want to do another Critters movie. So we got Barry Corbin to replace Emmett.
Corbin was fantastic, one of my favorite actors.
I'm back.
It's interesting because he's playing the same character. He's not playing Harv's brother. He's playing Sheriff Harv.
And that's always difficult to transition to a different actor playing the same part.
Their demeanors are somewhat the same, but different.
Barry Corbin did a great job doing that.
Nobody ever gave us flack about that. It always bothered me a little bit.
But Barry Corbin, I mean, he's real. He's Texas, and he brought this unbelievable gravitas and sense of humor. He's really funny in it by playing it straight.
Important business. Brad Brown is back in town.
Oh. Well, on the important chart, I'd put that right between a pineapple quiche and a pimple on the ass.
And then Lynn, she's a hell of a lot of fun. She's a gas. She's just always on it. She's always funny. She's always very kind. Super smart lady. Super smart lady. Very giving also.
Because her brother Bob owned the studio, often she would be cast in their films, and she was in the original Critters in a less showy performance, and I just accepted, well, sure, she'll be great. And then I discovered who Lynn Shay is, and she brought so much insanity and enthusiasm. I mean, that's Lynn.
Lynn Shay is the most bubbly, funny human being ever, and she's got the best energy, always.
She's totally there, and like, you know, the critter ball, and it was running, and this, and she just really brings everything to it. And she thought about every possibility. She came there with ideas every single day, and some of them were just hysterical.
I remember the whole thing about them having big teeth. I was sort of improvising this whole thing about them coming and my panic.
And to be able to let her go a little bit, you know, to give her rope, she would hit it home every time.
I was grateful to be included, obviously, and think she made a good transition.
I got a stop press story for you.
Oh, what's that?
Brad Brown is back in town.
Bradley Brown?
The boy who cried critter.
The casting process was really great. We saw a lot of people, and it helped that people had known the first movie, but we got really interesting people. You know, Leanne is not who you would expect to be the cute girl from high school whose dad owns the town newspaper. She's kind of a tomboy character and a little more grounded, somebody who's got a little more weight to her character.
It was, you know, down to the wire, and it was come to this building and come upstairs and audition, so I did, and then the other girl was there too, and then they kept sending me back downstairs and, you know, come back up in 15 minutes, and it was one of those. And then ultimately it came down to a phone call 2 weeks later. Do you drive a stick shift? Do you know how to drive a stick? And I was like, yeah, of course I know how to drive a stick. And the other girl didn't, so. Stupid reasons why people actually book stuff.
Leanne Curtis was great. Very cheerful, hard worker, very smart. She loved being on set, and we had a really nice friendship.
Kind of had a rebel attitude. Let's put it that way. She was very rebellious about, you know, proper behavior.
I was bored. What can I tell you? Hurry up and wait. Not a good thing for Leanne Curtis, because when she's waiting, this doesn't stop. This keeps going.
Perfect fit.
Tommy Hodges was somebody whose work I had never seen before, but he had a great sense of humor. He was big, you know, he towered over Scott, but he had a sweetness about him too that comes out a little bit.
I'll go.
Really?
And Herta Ware, who played Nana, she was 80 years old, out there in the coldest winter in 100 years in Santa Clarita, by the way. It was pretty brutal, but she was there and she was great.
Bradley, come on
in.
Hi, Nana.
Oh, look at you. You're shooting up like a stink queen.
And then there are other people like Sam Anderson, who is just a great character actor who is a chameleon.
He played my daddy.
Come on, I'll tuck you in.
You feel like he's been dad for years with these two girls, mom isn't there anymore, and there's just a complete family unit that has existed from before the opening credits and that continues after the end credits.
Sam Anderson was a very giving actor, a very patient man.
A fantastic listener with a really good spirit and also really smart actor.
The thing that I remember the most is when he gets arrowed by the Crites and passes out, and I had to drag him out. I think we did several takes of that, and I was so sore the next day.
Roxanne Kernahan, we had it scripted that we had to have a Playboy playmate that one of the alien turns into when he holds up the Playboy and transforms.
I don't remember that being our idea at all. I'm pretty sure it was Mick's idea.
We wanted somebody who was Playboy-like, but could also act. And so Roxanne Kernahan had come in to read for us, and we discovered she had also done a photo shoot for Playboy. They'd never used it, but they had done a full photo shoot, so we had all of this Playboy material, and we got Playboy to agree to let us actually use the logo, the whole thing, and the photo shoot. So we not only got this incredibly beautiful, incredibly talented, quite robust young woman to play this part, but we also had the material that was shot by actual Playboy photographers.
Oh, hi. This here's American culture. Good reading.
When it was made, I mean, that nude scene takes place in literally the coldest day in 100 years.
That poor girl had to run around naked damn near in like I think it was like 3-degree temperatures or something like that.
Everybody on that day really tried to be respectful of where we were looking and what we were looking at.
The story of Roxanne Kernahan is very tragic because she was a very promising actress. She was very funny in the film, but only a few years after doing Critters 2, she was killed in a car accident. So this incredibly promising career, really sweet, hardworking, funny, talented, beautiful woman was not able to fulfill the promise that she had given. Eddie Deason.
That was Mick Garris. Mick saw that part. He knew who should play it.
I had just loved in I Want to Hold Your Hand. I loved that movie, and I loved his character, and then in 1941 as well. So who would be better for that, that character?
You know, that guy's just as funny. If he can read a line looking like that, then you got to cast him.
Hey, who's gonna pay for all this stuff? Look at the mess you guys made.
There was a lot that Mick added to that, including his wife was in it.
That was the first movie that I ever put Cynthia in.
She wanted to be in that movie in the worst way, and he made sure it was the worst way possible for her.
Christopher Biggs was the guy who did the makeup for Zanti and created the big head and all.
Turns out that she was claustrophobic, and I didn't know this at the time. And we had her in a makeup where her arms are like strapped to her side, and then had this giant body that fit over her. Then we had a giant head. I mean, the head was, oh my God, it was probably 3 feet across, maybe 3.5 feet across. And she had this willow thin neck. So we thought, oh, we'll play this up. Giant head, thin neck. So we had a prosthetic that went on her neck, prosthetic that went on her face, and then this giant head.
Well, that all fit around her head and was glued in, and she couldn't see those eyes. There was nothing. They didn't even create air holes for her to breathe through her nose in or mouth, which are both covered up, and had to create slits.
She was in that makeup for almost 8 hours because it took about 2.5, 3 hours to get her in it. We shot multiple takes of multiple different angles.
She had to take a Valium to get through it, literally. I mean, she was ready to freak out. She said, Meg, can I talk to you for a minute? And so, I mean, it was really an overwhelming makeup job that anyone would have gone crazy from.
It turned out really good. It's one of my favorite designs for a creature, and it's sad because you see it like this big on screen, and you know, it's like a lot of lines running through it, and you can't see all the amazing detail that's in there.
Pay for the hexapod kill shall be withheld until the eradication of crimes on Earth is verified. There must be no doubt.
The whole process, it was everything that's difficult about filmmaking. Locations, nights, makeup effects, props, creature effects, all these puppets, children, animals. Everything that's tough about making a movie was in this little movie. We had 40 days to shoot it, which is half of what you'd get for a studio picture, but not stingy when it comes to a little independent movie like this. It was incredibly demanding, but I had a really great group of people. You know, Russell Carpenter was terrific, the Kyoto brothers. These are not divas, and the actors, the cast were all committed. So I was really lucky because it was a very difficult shoot.
Production itself was probably one of the most fun I had on a shoot, except for the fact that we were shooting 90% at night in probably the coldest freaking weather ever.
The movie was supposed to be taking place in Kansas in the summer, but we were in at that time, the coldest winter on record in Southern California.
It actually snowed. It snowed on location. On our location.
In the middle of the night.
We didn't know it was going to be as cold as it was, and so that was definitely a problem because even the interiors, we built most of them, although some of them we found locations. So they weren't heated. Nothing was heated.
I remember the day that was so cold. I had gone to get Sorel boots. They're like waterproof, quadruple padded, and there I was in my little Megan Morgan cute Easter outfit with these giant boots and woolen socks and long underwear in layers under that cute little Easter dress.
It's supposed to be spring and warm, and the grass kept dying, and so they'd go out and spray the grass green, you know, every morning.
It was so cold that instead of getting a t-shirt or a crew jacket, at the end of this shoot, we got woolen socks, embroidered. Critters too. Happy Christmas.
Sure is quiet. Maybe they're all dead. I wish.
We were able to recreate the town of Grover's Bend, which never really existed in the first movie other than actual locations. We built that town out in Santa Clarita.
Got to work with Philip again. We were out again in Canyon Country. You know, he was building a whole town.
Well, Phil Foreman had done Critters 1 as the art director, and he came in as the production designer on Critters 2. And another really relentlessly creative and inventive guy who was able to spend a nickel and get you $1's worth of production value. So there was a bunch of just kind of warehouse buildings, flat, low buildings that were used by the sheriff's department and the police department as target ranges. So Philip Dean Foreman was able to take these squat little concrete buildings, and we put not just fronts on all of these things and turn it into the hay and seed and grain shop and the newspaper office and the Hungry Heifer and all that stuff. Almost all of them were practical. We were able to use for interiors as well as exteriors. And it's a tribute to Phil. His work was really fantastic. I don't think there was anything that Phil could not provide. Often you'll say, I'd love to do this, and they say, oh, we can't afford that, how about this? It never felt like there was a compromise made. You know, it felt like we were making a studio movie very quickly and very cheaply, but we were getting production values that would not have been this good with another production designer.
It was unbelievable that we could get that kind of detail out of that kind of money. That was very impressive to me.
This is a Western. I'm not a big Western fan. I'm not a big student of Westerns. I appreciate them more now than when I was a kid. But I started watching old westerns and John Wayne movies and Howard Hawks movies and John Ford movies. And so there's a lot of that influence, particularly when they get into the church on top of the hill as the siege of critters is coming, the warriors from another planet.
If we sit around here on our duffs, bitching, we're going to end up tomorrow's leftovers. Now, I don't too much relish that idea. I think it's time to fight back.
I think we shot that church scene right close to Christmas. It might have been the last day of the shoot before we had a brief hiatus for the Christmas break. I think it was a kind of tearful time in that church between takes. I think we were singing Christmas carols. That's kind of a beautiful memory that I have of it, because it was a church we built. Every piece of it was done by our construction crew. And yet you go outside the church, it looked like a church from the outside, and you could hear Christmas carols coming out of it. So it was like a real holy night in a fake, completely fake environment. And I had real warmth as a result of that fake environment.
Let's go on inside. It'll be much safer in there.
My best day on set was probably the day we were shooting the church scene, and I'll say it's my best day because I've never fallen asleep standing up before, but managed to do that and slept through the gunshot. Camera wasn't on me, so I was in the corner, nodding off, because we were doing night for day and day for night, and my body clock was so crazy. So I just kind of just nodded off.
I say the boys bad news and shoot.
You're right.
I'll admit to the most challenging day on set being the day I could not remember my lines to save my life. It was the most embarrassing thing. It had nothing to do with anything other than something about the way, I don't know, I couldn't. So Bubba, the grip, decided to go get a cue card for me. I don't even know that it stayed in, actually. It's a scene in front of the white picket fence in front of Herta's house. And I think it's before we go in to get her and find her cornered by the critters, and then we're all in the corner like,
Nana, the critters are here. No shit, Bradley! Damn me!
I would say the most challenging day was dealing with the heat in those costumes, particularly when you were inside, like when we were in the diner. We're in like heavy boots and stuff, and dealing with just that heat. And also the guns telescoped. It was all pneumatic. You were holding the guns, but it was a cord that was running out over to this guy who was operating it. So you would lift it up, act like you were setting it like a shotgun, but actually he was pulling a trigger to make it go to extend. Then you would fire and stuff. So I remember that being more sophisticated second time around.
And turn away, eat, and door!
Well, the Kyoto brothers are really great.
The Kyotos are the best to work with. They're kind. The three of them run the gamut of personalities. We've got Ed, Mr. Business. We've got Steven, kind of shy. And we've got Charlie, kind of like, twisted, but also a little bit reserved.
Steven is the director. Charlie is the artist who did all the designs and everything, brilliant artist. And Edward was the producer. So put them all together and they're this amazing package. We had overwhelming effects to make.
I can't imagine us ever doing a Critters, large or small, without the Kyoto brothers, because they're like the moms and dads of the Critters.
In between Critters 1 and Critters 2, we went off and made our movie, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. And then when we finished that, the talk of Critters 2 came on board. They asked us if we were interested in doing it, and we said, absolutely. We created them, we love them, so
we were really
let's
happy
go.
that they liked the work that we had done in the first one and have us continue with the sequel.
It was massive. We had so much to do on such a small budget and limited time.
We were always up to build anything.
The hardware store on Main Street was where our critter shop was. So when we weren't actually performing, we had a full stock shop there where we would repair and build new rigs and things.
You know how in a bowling alley where they have like the racks of the balls, It looked like they had racks of different sizes of the critters. They had big ones like this, and then they would have smaller ones.
Their crew was amazing. We got a lot more than what they paid for it.
He was asking us to do really interesting things, like the gang of critters, what we call the caravan.
We knew what we had learned in Critters 1. We were really good at getting a single ball or two balls following one another, but this was a mass, 20, 30, 40 balls in a row. So we played around with the notion of, we got little snaps that we put on the sides of the ball and put a wire, created a little bit of a yoke, and we were able to pull at a time, and it was able to roll and look really good.
So we had 6 on yokes, then we had like a bar, connected them to that bar, and then we had another row of 6 critters
Just a little grid.
on yokes.
Yeah, just a little grid of really lightweight aluminum that was drilled out to put all the wires on it.
With little wheels.
The wheels turned out not to work as soon as we put it in the field.
We dragged it.
But the basic rig, yeah, we just dragged it.
And by dragging it, there would be dust being kicked up. And the thing is, the balls weren't just being dragged, the balls were rolling. Which was really great. So you see the hair tufts was whipping around and dust was being kicked up in between them. So there was a lot of detail, a lot of movement going on within the pool of critters that just made it look great. And then when it went over the terrain, it went up and down and around, yeah, it was
and then at one point we had the medium critter ball that was leading them to the factory where all the meat was. So he was on a separate yoke, and it was, again, pulled by an ATV. But it was just like just a little idea that we just kind of R&D'd in our shop.
We were thrilled to be making our films in the heyday of practical effects. Everything was made for the cut.
Yeah, and because it was a first unit shot, Russ Carpenter got to light it. He got it. He knew that keep the lighting down so you wouldn't see the rig. It was painted black, but it had the potential to, if lit poorly, you'd see it.
Well, I don't know. If we paint them, we're seeing it the worst contrast right now. You got black against white. Let's try it again.
I think a lot of the audience might not realize that we just don't make one puppet for the entire show. We make specialty puppets for specific gags.
And Critters 2 is really kind of the king of the specialty puppet.
A lot of specialty puppets for each individual cut, each individual gag. There were a lot of exploding critters, and we had to create blow-up critters.
Blow-up critters, yeah.
We made them out of urethane foam.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were more rigid, so you would actually see pieces explode and break apart. If they were made out of rubber, it would just kind of distort and look kind of bogus.
Yeah, we would get condoms, and we'd put green slime in it and blood and stuff, and we'd load them up. The funny story is Brad went to pick up, he
was one of our interns.
He was one of our interns, and he went to the drugstore.
7-Eleven in the middle of the night.
He asked him, he said, he bought, I want a large box of KY jelly and 2 large boxes of condoms. And the guy looked at him and he said, "We're having a party." The difficult days are when you have multiple critters, multiple puppeteers that you have to set up, hide, get rid of them, and then you have 10 puppets, and you have to touch them up, make sure they all look good. To get 10 puppeteers, to let them all stand up straight, because you look at the camera, and then all of a sudden one's over here like this, one's leaning forward. Those are the days that you're most tense.
Yeah, do we have any video of the puppeteers underneath? Because you're never like this. You're always kind of like this. And then you got a monitor over there, and you're looking at the monitor, and you have to look at your puppet, and you can't stay in that position for too long.
The Kyoto brothers were always in the wings. I mean, somewhere. Sometimes they were subterranean, sometimes they were above you. You knew they were there. You couldn't really look at them. You had to just look at what they were throwing at you.
And the difficulty with puppeteering, like I said, directors, someone would talk to the puppet. Okay, I want you to do this, and go, no, you have to talk to the puppeteer. Yeah, because that's your performer. They forget that it's the puppeteer who is the performer, who is the character, and a lot of times they avoid it. And you have to say, no, you know what? tell him what to do.
And how many times did somebody kick the puppet?
Yeah.
You know, they're in a scene, they're fighting a critters and they kick it or they hit it, and you say, no, there's a hand in there.
But they were always ready, and they always had ideas. I mean, everything was planned, but they were ready if you had an idea that you improvised at the moment, that there was a funny thought.
And the other cool thing that Mick did was that he gave characters. You know, in the first movie, you couldn't tell one critter from another. We built 8 of them, and they were all identical. But in this one, we gave personality. Like one of them gets shot, the hair shuts off. You know, so he's got a big bald spot and just damage to them. So the critters became a little more recognizable characters than in the past.
Yeah, in the first critters, they were supposed to be, different characters. We actually made little prosthetics for them, but they were so small and they were shot, again, at night in the dark. We weren't able to maximize the separate characters.
Yeah, but even in hindsight, it seems less important.
Yeah, and another fun aspect of Critters 2 was the baby critters, something that was new, added beyond Critters 1. And they were really cool designs. They didn't do very much because they were just these tiny little
rod puppets.
Little rod puppets, but it added another dimension to the whole critt, species.
That was an interesting sequence because the old guy was supposed to be attacked. They were supposed to all jump on him. We couldn't figure out how to do that. What we did is we rigged them all with monofilament and had them over here, and we actually rigged them through, his shirt. And on cue, we pulled the string, and they all went. Whoop.
The Easter Bunny scene was not really a part of the original script when I got it. There were the beginnings of that, but it wasn't nearly so comical. And Dave Urson, who played that new sheriff who would replace Sheriff Harv, I don't think he enjoyed himself tremendously until that scene. He was a secondary character in a rather full cast of characters, but he did make the most of it.
What the hell was in you?
They wanted to see the shape moving underneath the costume, so we got a critter ball, and we put line on it, and we fed it through the suit, so we 2 guys on either side of it, pulling it back and forth to make it go where we wanted to do.
I love the idea of doing something really comical and then jerking your head around. Anytime you can poke in the eye of Norman Rockwell, where you have what people imagine was the perfect Americana, and show that it never existed and it had blood in its veins also, suddenly you're laughing and the Easter Bunny is, whoa, no, I've got critters chewing my balls off. And then suddenly you're inside the church and he crashes in, and then there's blood running out of his mouth, and it turns ultra serious for a moment. That's kind of what the fun of going to the movies is about, is to be taken off guard and to have your expectations elevated, hopefully. The Hungry Heifer attack, the massacre, the critter massacre and the Hungry Heifer. We storyboarded it, we worked it out, we planned it and everything, but most of the shots were done by Alan Holtzman, who was our second unit director.
The Hungry Heifer, I think we probably have 8 or 10 puppets working. So just the logistics of getting that set up and then in a master shot to place them and then going back and doing all the little specific gags.
You can only inch your way through puppet stuff, the critter getting his hair yanked off, and going, I did do some critter voices.
The French fries, the squeezing the ketchup bottle.
And the mustard and the stench and the stink and the chop meat.
So you had
the
technical
tough.
difficulty of setting all that up and then just being in that environment. It got old really quick.
That took days, and they were shooting pieces of those in that Hungry Heifer set as well as in part of a stage. I say stage, I mean converted warehouse or whatever empty place we could find to shoot it in. There were some cool things. I mean, I wanted to do little gags like having the eyeballs pop out and go boing. That was my voice sped up as that sound effect. That is kind of the height of the Warner Brothers cartoon feel that it went for, and the comedic chaos of it.
I remember having gone back to the Hungry Heifer after the big scene was shot, and the meat had spoiled because we used real meat, and I happened to have the flu. So my olfactory was not working as well as everybody else's, so I kind of got lucky. Thank you.
I think it was easier to purchase meat than to make some kind of faux chop meat.
And I can't say that we raised any red flags to it.
No, we didn't know. I mean,
It was a one-day shoot.
It seemed fine.
We're going to be in and out of this thing. One night, we're going to be in and out. We didn't know we're going back 3 days later.
No, but even besides that, when you start chomping on that chop meat, it gets in the puppet. Then the next day, it starts to get rancid.
Your hand would be in a puppet, and it would be all this meat, and they weren't sealed. They would come down and it'd be all over your hand,
and it smelled. It just smelled awful. So now, putting those puppets on your hand, they were stinky little bastards.
No, the thing is, you have to maintain the puppet. So when everyone else was going home and wrapping, we would have to take the puppets and actually spend all night cleaning them. The baked beans, we'd spend all night cleaning out, taking it apart, actually sometimes taking the skin off. If blood or baked beans or feathers got in there, because they had to be operational the next day.
One of Mick's big contributions was the idea that multiple critters would come together and join and to create a larger ball. Throughout the movie, you saw maybe 3 or 4 critters jump together, and then it culminated with the big ball at the end.
The big critter ball was a nightmare because it had to move, it had to be believable, it had to roll over people.
The giant critter ball is certainly iconic. It's on the video cover and all of that stuff, but incredibly complicated.
I mean, it was a 10-foot diameter
Yeah, 10-foot diameter. It's funny. I think it was originally written to be like 30 feet, and then we said, guys, you realize how big 30 feet is? And then it said, well, let's 10 feet. Then we showed them what 10 feet is, how big 10 feet is. And they got it.
There were several balls. There was one carefully articulated ball with actually beautiful heads.
It is actually a critter ball that has remote control motors where the mouths bite, the eyes blink, all of this stuff is literally going on.
We wanted it to have a certain amount of articulation, so we brought in John Heil, who is an effects artist that we work with, and he came up with this idea of an aluminum superstructure, sort of like a geodesic dome sort of construction. Put it together, that would be the basic ball, and then we covered it with critter heads, just like the front facade. Some of those had solenoid-controlled mouths, some of them had red flashing lights, and then it was all filled in with a combination of different color fur to make it look like a homogeneous.
Some of them you're seeing their butts and their bodies.
I still think they're probably
interspersed.
they're like 300 faces on it, though.
I think so.
But that didn't roll very well.
First idea we had was having a center axle with a bar sticking out so we could actually roll it on the off-camera side. It worked once or twice in a couple of scenes, but it wasn't really as operational
It wasn't very location friendly. As soon as you hit a rut or a rock, it would tend to veer off.
And what was really bad is you were rolling it on the actual faces, and the weight of it was crushing them. We made the first Mega Ball test. The first test of the Mega Ball on terrain. And Mr. Chiodo, how would you say the test worked out?
I think it sucks balls.
So the producers hooked us up with Marty Breslin, the special effects guy on it. And then he took our basic ball and built a rig, an outrigger, in the back of a pickup truck. They mounted the ball. It was just above the surface
a couple
of
inches
the ground,
off the ground.
and it had a motor that would make it roll.
As I remember, it almost didn't work.
The chase scene between the critter ball and the pickup truck was incredibly complicated to shoot because we had to mount the critter ball so that it was not attached to the truck, except some scenes it is attached to the truck, but having it pound against without ruining anything, very expensive device for what we were doing.
There was the point at which the critter ball is right next to us, and I'm, dealing with this big giant thing and the camera and Scott. It was kind of fun, and it was just, I wanted to make sure that I was doing what I needed to do because it's very distracting to work with a giant critter ball to the left of you.
And then there's another one that is just a bunch of critter pelts around a giant inflatable ball that you can control and you can roll.
So we got this giant weather balloon, made a canvas jacket for it, and then glued fur pieces on it to simulate the look, because that ball would never be seen standing still. It would always be moving, so we didn't need to put the detail of the faces on it.
They had it yoked to an ATV. Basically, the guy is pulling this thing, chasing a crowd of people, and it was a hoot. It was hysterical to be on the location and seeing a crowd of people running, and this giant furry ball is being pulled and it's chasing them along. And to the camera, it was a perfect illusion.
Yeah, and there were other times where they'd get the ATV or a vehicle and they'd actually hit it and cause it to roll.
Yeah.
Then we pushed it off the hill, they'd have it roll down the hill.
Yeah. One time it got away from us and rolled down into the canyon. We had to go get it.
There are shots where we would literally be behind it, pushing it. There's a shot of it coming down the center of the town that I'm behind.
Look at that first shot of the ball coming into Grover's Bend, and you see two pair of legs running behind it.
You see my legs behind it.
It is a crazy concept that actually worked out really well. I love the actual premiere of it, the way they showed it breaking out of that barn. It was, to me, it was fantastic. What a great image. It was that night when the anticipation and rigging the ball, putting it on the ramp, anticipation of it, and that night, the magic of seeing what everyone was laughing about and talking about come to life was a thrill. It was quite a moment, something that we had worked on, and you knew what you wanted to look like in your mind's eye, and then to actually see it live performed in front of you, it was really wonderful.
And when you see that whole sequence together, again, it's just it's a culmination of everybody's hard work coming together, all the departments.
Yeah, it was everybody.
The critter wagon train, and then the culmination with the ball bursting out.
My favorite shot is the crowd running away from the critter ball, and it rolls over a guy, and you see a skeleton remain after it rolled over him. I thought that was a perfect Mick gag.
It just felt like an iconic horror movie thing that I giggled completely as we, it's obviously done in cuts. You just have the guys pushing a critter ball and a guy running away from it, and the next cut you have the ball roll over and reveal the shredded body that's left behind.
We shot that on a soundstage, and it was just a big stretch of grass that they had, and we had him posed in a kind of like a falling, had fallen on his face sort of a thing. And we positioned it so that the foot was off frame, and it wasn't on purpose, it just happened to be there. And during one of the takes, somebody bumped the foot, and the whole skeleton kind of went pickle. And Mick was like, "Oh, do more of that!" So we did it, and we did a couple more takes where we're actually taking the leg and just kind of, it looked just like the guy was like twitching still a little bit.
It was funny, it's really kind of the perfect filmmaking technique of all the things it takes to make a movie. Because then we went back and created a wall of critters that we put the hero puppets in to do close-up, and they would spin the camera and we were puppeteering it. So we'd get hero critter movement in those critter panels, and it's just like the perfect culmination of movie making, all the different departments.
And again, it topped the critters previously in the film. Now you had this big critter at the end. So it works great dramatically.
And just the sculpting and the design and everything, really, really great people working on that movie. And everybody was really committed to it.
That's the thing, what's great about working on set is you're given the problem to solve, and you're not alone. You got a whole group, a whole network of unbelievably talented people that jump in, and that's why things come. That's why things work.
I think creative solutions are always more exciting to audiences. That's why the greater the CGI, the more people look to movies that genuinely surprise. Because once you see it all, your imagination is kind of shut off. So I think Critters 2 challenged us, but it was a good challenge.
The Kyotos did all the crites. I did one crite gag, which was the bounty hunter transforming from a big crite, back into the bounty hunter. That was quite an evolved gag. It was one of those things that had like 5 or 6 different pieces, and we were trying to do a transformation, but we were trying to do it smoothly, and Mick didn't like the bladder thing, and he didn't want to do the melty thing again every single time because we had him transforming like 6 or 7 times.
I was losing it.
When Terrence Mann's character loses his cool, or whatever the case may be, and kind of goes nuts, we wanted to have every creature that he'd ever been flash across the face. And Mick was trying to think of a way we could do it with editing and stuff. And so what we finally ended up doing is Mick cut together a clip of 16mm footage, and then we projected that onto the face as it's undulating and moving around and all that stuff. So that turned out really cool.
Is he okay?
He ain't breathing.
That's okay, he don't have a mouth.
I was going for a look. I was trying to get, and it was like we took the mask and painted a thin layer of clear, and then laid in some veins and that, and then laid another layer of some other colors and blotched it up, and then sort of fleshy tones, and sort of built back from that, so it had some depth, and it actually looked as if it was like a derma, not just rubber.
Oh no, Lee. Lee, no, don't look at me, Lee. No.
Originally, it was supposed to be bladders and stuff like that, but the day of, one of the bladders burst. So we had to literally bring the boobs onto like broomsticks or something, and then pulled them back, and then on cue pushed them through as the costume was being pulled and torn in the proper places, and then it kind of popped in place. Everybody loves that gag, and it's like, I always cringe because it's not the way it was supposed to have worked. We actually ended up doing it correctly for a pickup when it went from Roxanne to Eddie, and so we had the nice large breasts, and they kind of, and that's what we were going to do initially. We were going to inflate that and have it tear the costume apart. But the day of, something happened with the bladders that were inside of it, and they broke.
The explosion of the hamburger factory, that was another big deal that we did first unit. Interesting story about that was that we had a really big, rugged bear of a guy who was our physical effects master. And so we had talked about this big explosion, and it was going to go big, and then another explosion, another explosion. And so he's making a big deal out of this, and we're ready to shoot it. And he said, "Here, do you want to hold the trigger and you do it?" I said, No, I don't want to fuck it up. You're the master. You should do that. And so planning, and it takes hours and hours and hours to get to it because it's such a big deal. And so, ready and action, and boom, and the first one blows. And what happened was, there were supposed to be 3 giant explosions. The first explosion burned up all the wires that were going to detonate the explosions to follow. So, as big as the explosion in the movie is, it's 1/3 of what it was supposed to be. You can't do take 2 once you've already exploded take 1. So we just had to settle for that.
We fried them!
As far as the editing goes, New Line had an editor that they'd worked with on several things, and we had a meeting because they loved the guy, and we just didn't really see eye to eye. A really good editor, but I don't know if the comedy, I don't remember what the circumstances were, but we were interviewing different people, and then I saw the resume of Charles Bornstein, who had worked with Carpenter on The Fog and on Halloween, and he'd worked with a friend of mine, Tom McLaughlin. And Tommy and I were very close friends, and he had nothing but raves about Charles. And so we got together, we really hit it off great. And our post-production was great too. I mean, we had a sound designer who had come from Batteries Not Included because he'd done this big Steven Spielberg produced Universal movie that I had written, was the original writer on with Steven. And he wanted to establish his own company. So he was willing to take on this little movie and gave it a soundscape that you would not expect from that. We used a full orchestral score, a 40-piece orchestra that we cobbled together non-union in a little place out in the valley that the composer Nicholas Pike put together. And Steven Spielberg ended up using that, and he and his editor would use that for temp music for movies he was making for years after we did that.
Hey, little buddies, come gather round. This here's the very best eating in town. A hungry heifer's the place to be. A lip licking good, you can take it from me.
The Hungry Heifer jingle was not scripted, but it was something I knew I wanted. My wife was a singer-songwriter, had been in a band, was a bass player and all. And we knew we were going to have some stuff on the radio, and we wanted to introduce the Hungry Heifer. And so I asked her if she could put together a jingle. Jingles were not her specialty. She was a real songwriter and the like. And I just gave her the line, "At the Hungry Heifer, we won't give you a bum steer." But all of the rest of the stuff, that was her creation. She knew what we needed, something bouncy, an earworm, which was a term that had not been invented yet. It's actually my voice in the end credits doing the, remember, if you all want to come out and get your, buffalo burgers and moo shakes and all that stuff. But she had put it together and it worked out so great. And everybody was so thrilled with how it worked out that it's also the end title music, which was really fun. But she had a blast doing it.
At the Hungry Heifer, we won't give you a bum steer.
We went into this knowing it was going to be a PG-13, but we never had a problem with the ratings board. I thought the nudity would be an issue, but we surprisingly never had that problem.
Kill Christ.
I did the best movie I could make, and it was a disaster financially. Total flop.
I was really disappointed. I thought we did a good job on it, and I really liked it.
I thought New Line did a great job promoting. The posters were great, the TV ads, the trailers and all were really good, but what they didn't do was test to see if there was an interest in a sequel to Critters. And it proved that there wasn't.
There's a lot of reasons movies don't do well.
Yeah, I had mixed feelings. I mean, I like Critters too. I think it has more of a comic tone to it, but it makes it a different kind of movie. People that wanted a horror film and were hoping for more kills like Critters 1 might have been disappointed. So I like them both, but for two different reasons. Critters, I think, is a scary little suspenseful monster movie, and Critters 2 is more of a character comedy piece.
Yeah, where the times where maybe you could have gone for a little more tension, there's a character bit, a critter bit that's funny. So it was just a little lighter fare.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it. I'm certainly happy with the work that we did in the movie. And overall, the production is just really good. It's a good looking movie.
Bob Shea just told me a story that's also on the podcast we did together. I had never heard this story until this year with Bob. And he was the head of New Line, and the movie was about to come out, and he was meeting with a guy who was going to provide a big bunch of financing for the studio. I mean, a big bunch of money. And so he was wining and dining him, and he said, tonight, we've got a new movie opening tonight. I'll take you, let's go to dinner at, really classic place on Hollywood Boulevard, and then we'll go to the movie and see the opening. And so they do, and they go to the theater on Hollywood Boulevard, and there's no line. I'm thinking, well, it's LA, people come at the last minute. No line, no line, no line. It's time to go in for the movie, and there's nobody in the theater. And he lost that money. They did not invest in New Line because the movie tanked completely, and Bob was protecting me by not telling me until 30 years after the fact.
Say, listen, what just happened here?
If I was you, partner, I'd roll this rig right out of town and not say nothing about none of this to nobody.
It's weird, this movie is now 30 years old, and it was a flop when it came out, but now it plays in theaters, at film festivals all the time. It's more popular than it ever was 30 years ago, and people talk about the Easter Bunny scene and the hungry heifer and the giant critter ball and things like that. They've kind of become iconic, and it's rare that you get to connect with an audience like this.
I think the Critters franchise is popular because so many young boys, young men mostly, grew up watching these movies, and they just love them. And like the kid in the adult male who grew up with this film is still very attached and watches them regularly. The amount of fan pages that are out there would be indicative.
The Critters movies have a life, but it's more like a cult life than a mainstream life. And that's fine, because the people who love it really love it. And they love the ups and downs of the Critters movies. I'm
so privileged and honored to have been a part of that film, because otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here right now talking to you. But I think it's something that'll last a good long time.
This movie, I think, it makes me happy. It makes me happy, and when I sit with an audience and see that it makes them happy too. When you sit with people and they react to something that you made, there's nothing more gratifying as an artist than that. And to find that your work engages them to the point where they physically respond with laughter or screams or joy, I mean, that's what it's all about. That's why we're here.